I'm Kristal Barlaan. I have been playing the harp for 20 plus years, and music was in our family first with my sister. My parents put my sister in piano when she was 5. And like all good younger sisters, I wanted to do music also. So they started me on piano, but my sister had about 3-year head start and I was competitive. So I was always comparing myself to my older sister being a fantastic pianist and myself being a 3-year younger sister. And so at some point, my piano teacher said that she would help me find a harp teacher, because apparently when I was 4 years old, I had seen a harpist at a wedding, and that's all I would talk about, is wanting to be a harpist. So my piano teacher thought, well, what better way of getting rid of a problem student than finding a harp teacher for her? So around age 11, I started playing harp, and I have been a harpist ever since. Yes, a harp is a fantastic instrument because there's a lot of stereotypes about it, and it's interesting to navigate those. So as a harpist, first you become a musician, and then you figure out who you are and what to do with your instrument. I believe that it's been a very enriching experience because I have been able to do more and see more through being a harpist. I've gotten to be invited to different events, different locations, and travel that only the world of harp would bring me. I had a lot of training when I was in elementary school, junior high, and high school. I was homeschooled, so I was able to be the ideal student and practice an hour every day. Most students nowadays practice an hour twice a week or something, and then they wonder why they're not that skilled. So I was able to practice an hour every day, which got me to a very high level very quickly. And then at around 17 or 18, I had to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And luckily, my harp teacher wanted me to go to the school she taught at. So she said if I go to San Jose State, I would get a full scholarship. I said yes. So I went to San Jose State as a full-time harp student, undergrad, and that was when I really decided I was going to be a harpist because I was majoring in music. And then shortly after that, my harp friend, she was doing her studies at San Francisco Conservatory, and I thought that sounded very rigorous. So after a few years at San Jose State, I applied to San Francisco Conservatory. And they said I either had to redo my BA or come in as a master's student. And I decided that there's no way I was going to redo my BA, so I took some college classes online, and I got my BA very quickly, and I entered as a master's at the age of 20. So I was very young as a master's. I was probably 2 to 3 years younger than everybody else during my program, and that is when I entered the world of being a small fish in a very big pond. As opposed to San Jose State, I was a very accomplished musician in a very large field. So it was a very interesting. So throughout that whole time, I practiced an hour a day, and then 2 hours a day, and then when I was getting my master's, all harp, all life. Life was only harp. 3, 4, 5 hours study, everything. And that was a 2-year period of life when I only did music. So some of the stereotypes you probably can guess. It's an expensive instrument, female dominated, angelic, classical, and those are some of the stereotypes I have to either go with or battle. If you go with them, then you become a classical female harpist, which has its advantages. The other things are there's a lot of pop music available, there are lots of men harpists, and there are ways to play a harpist where you don't have to be wealthy. If you think about it, a lot of good violins cost $20,000 on up, and parents don't know that, and so they think a violin is cheaper than a harp, where these harps behind me are significantly less than a $20,000 violin. So you can be a harpist, and you don't have to be wealthy to be a harpist. So classical harp is something I'm very comfortable with because I was trained in the classical field. So I embrace classical music a lot. However, in San Jose, sometimes that's a dying art form, and I only realized how dying of an art form it is when I talk to my students and I can't relate any of my classical experience to their current life. So a lot of times I find that in order to inspire my students, I have to start with where they are, and they are with whatever pop music. I use that as a huge broad term as anything not classical. So contemporary music, things that they're into. And I have to learn to translate the harp and meet them where they are. So we're learning how to sing and play the harp, play contemporary tunes, ask them what their favorite artists are, and try to copy their style, and really learning how to play something relevant in their lives. Well, I just see fewer and fewer people embracing it. So perhaps it's not dying, it's going extinct. It's just the more people I meet and the more I learn about this area, is the fewer people I meet who understand the world of music and the classical music and the classical arts. But I know there's a strong hold of us musicians that keep it going. The classical tradition is a tradition for a reason. And a lot of people know that if they're studying to be a serious artist in any field, that they go back to the roots and the heyday and the highlights of that art form. So classical music, it has its stereotypes of, yes, dead and dying and blah, 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 but we teachers know how to take all of its principles and transform it into modern times. And so we are teaching them classical principles without them knowing. Some of those principles that are very important that we all use are showing up on time, and showing up and doing your assignment. So those are like the basics every teacher teaches their families that they involved with. Like, can you show up on time, and can you do your assignment? And then after they accomplish that, we start working on enriching that experience, at telling them that the songs they are learning have a rich history. History of maybe the Romans, maybe the French, maybe the Germans, and we start interweaving all of the historical principles and the richness. And after that, they learn how to be an artist and how to be expressive and to share their voice with the art. And so all of that is a classical tradition, but a lot of times we repackage it so they don't see that. Yes. There is a harp scene. There are 2 chapters in the Bay Area. There's the South Bay chapter, and then there's the North Bay chapter. And each chapter, I will probably underestimate this, has about 100 participants. And then there are, in those participants, there's teachers, there's professionals, and there's students, and some of them are, all 3. So there's in the South Bay, there are maybe 7 or 8 prominent teachers, I believe. So I think that's quite a few. People would be surprised to know that. There could be more than that, so if I'm wrong, please let me know. So in the comments below, let me know how many professional harp teachers there are in the Bay Area. But in the South Bay, I believe there's about 8 or 9 of us, and I believe we all know each other and know what we're doing, and it's a pretty small world. So we like each other on Facebook and follow each other's performances and things like that. We stay connected. So
Okay.
the umbrella is the American Harp Society, and
Just
then nationwide, yes.
Okay.
And then one is just South Bay, and then one is North Bay. That's the
Interesting.
difference. Yeah, so 2 sections of the same one.
It's very cool. I didn't even know that.
Yeah, so almost everybody knows everybody, just because it's a lot smaller than the violin world or the piano world. Right. I started with San Jose State and had a fantastic music program. The strings department at the time was very small, and I was the only harpist. So I was able to be in the band and the wind ensemble, the strings, orchestra. I think they did a couple other things, and a lot of times I was the go-to musician anytime they needed a harp. I believe I even won a concerto competition at the time. After that, I went to San Francisco Conservatory as a music performance major, and at the time there was one harpist. That was myself. And then I believe at the end of my time, they started getting a few other harpists there. And it was a lonely time. Again, as the only harpist at a conservatory, you got all of the opportunities, whether you wanted them or not. And so it was a crazy time of doing new music ensemble and Baroque ensemble. And luckily I got out of the jazz ensemble, and then the orchestra and the opera. And you name it, chamber groups, composers. I worked a lot with composers, and you name it, I was in the practice room all day when I wasn't in classes. I think the reason there are fewer harpists is education. Is that in the schools where people most of the time get their first exposure to music, harp is not an option. And it's obviously why it's not an option is they don't have 10 harps hanging around at every school waiting to be used. Now, as we can tell, that's a tragedy, because harp is actually a very versatile instrument and could be used more. It's equal to piano or like a violin and cello, because it has both hands. So one of the things I did out of school was approach a few schools, elementary and high schools, and said, hi, you have a music program, could we start a harp program? And of course I was expecting them to say, nice try, ha ha ha. But I actually found one school who said, okay, that could be interesting. And so in 2008, I started a harp in school program at Valley Christian. And they already had the structure for a fantastic elementary kids program. So basically all the school had to do is hire a harp teacher and buy a few harps, and we were able to incorporate it. So now with the Valley Christian, probably close to maybe 100 or more students have all experienced the harp, and out of that group, a percentage have actually become harp students. Angelic harp is the name I gave myself when I was 12. And that is because I was trying to brand myself without knowing how to brand, because I was a young adolescent. So I basically said, well, here's the stereotype. Great, let's name it. It's not taken on the internet because the internet was still new. And I took the name Angelic Harp. So I started Angelic Harp Performance and Angelic Harp Academy. I took that name at 12 because I was working on just starting to perform very little. By the time I was 16, I started performing professionally, where I was hired for weddings at 16. People would pay me and they would say, you look very young. I said, that is true, but I'm also very good. And I would play at weddings. And then by the time I was 18 or 20, it was my main job. And I pretty much worked all the way. I've been working ever since on performing. So the brand name happened because that's what happened. In hindsight, maybe I'll try to rebrand myself, but at this point it's very stuck. So music education is definitely a passion of ours, especially at San Jose Academy of Music. I believe all of the teachers here are very dedicated not only to music, but education. Music is where you just teach the students how to play. Education is where you enrich their lives as well. And I think if you talk to any of us here at San Jose Academy of Music, we will all have stories on how not only are we a music teacher, but we are a counselor, and sometimes a psychiatrist, where we end up bringing out the best of each student and helping them relate their experience of music in their life. And so you're always challenging the students to think about how what they're playing impacts their life and then all the people around them. So it's a very big mission. And then on top of that, we use history and philosophy and art history to really instill them how big the world of music is. One thing in our Bay Area culture is we're a very casual culture. Jeans and breaking traditions, no traditions actually in a good way. And that's very liberating to all of us young people. We are very happy to have such a free culture. At the same time, we threw the baby out with the bathwater, which means we have very low professional skill set. Showing up on time, dressing well, having your music prepared, doing the instructions, and then being polite and respectful, and learning how to communicate with others and adults. A lot of times students come in very shy, and it's our job to give them confidence to look us in the eye, to ask what questions they have, and really just bring that out in a student. So it's a very beautiful thing to be a music educator, because you end up shaping their entire life and really growing the person as an individual. And you don't really get that in school or in other sports or any other setting where you're one-on-one with a professional teacher who is there to help you as a whole. So SJAM, San Jose Academy of Music, I joined them in 2008 when I got married. So here's the story. My mother-in-law is Ophelia. She began the entire program about 30-something years ago. She was just a music teacher on her own. She got her degrees and very great performance experience both in the Philippines and locally. And she started a music business, and she was one of the best in the areas, and a lot of people came to her. So as she got established, she invited more teachers to come to teach with her. So that went on for about 20-something years, and both her children became professional musicians. One went to Boston Conservatory to study violin, and the other went to Berklee College of Music to be a sound engineer. So Eric and I met before that at actually the Conservatory of Music. He was a piano organ major, and I was the harp major. The organ and the harp were in the same room, and that's a very bad idea because both of them are very big instruments that don't want to be moved. And at the time, the practice rooms were very limited, and it was very hard to practice. So every time I got to school and the organist was in there, I was pretty upset because he could not move his instrument, but mine was slightly smaller than his, so therefore I had to move my instrument. Luckily, most of the time he was nice and charming and found me a room, so I wouldn't have to run around looking for a room. But a lot of times we would try to schedule out where we could practice. So that was our first meeting. And to make a very, very, very long story short, about 6 years later, we got married. And that is also when Eva, my sister-in-law, and Eric took over from Ophelia, the San Jose Academy of Music, and they moved it to the Point Church, and we started growing the business as a whole family, where all of us was running it and teaching, and we grew with several teachers, and it became a very strong establishment, multi-generational. And that is more or less where we are today, about 10 years later, 7 years later. It's a family-run business with Ophelia at the head, and Eric and Eva and myself in second in command. Yes, it's very great to be able to come to a location that's so beautiful as the Point Church and has huge music studios to teach in. Most of the time, if you're a teacher in the Bay Area and you don't have your own space, you're either teaching from your home or you're teaching from a really tiny practice room that's white and ugly. And it's very hard to teach music in such ugly spaces. So I love teaching here, and it's great to be working with the family because you always know what's going on and you're very connected that way. So with that, I am happy I spent some time with you sharing my story of how I became a harp teacher and what music means. If you're interested in lessons, piano, violin, cello, guitar, voice, choir, harp, please check us out at sanjoseacademyofmusic.com and find us on the web. Give us a thumbs up, join our videos. Thank you.